Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers handgun carry rights, the First Amendment, and de facto arrests, and is brought to us by News Now Memphis's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. In a video posted on September 29th, 2019 by First Amendment Auditor Aaron Branch, Deputy James and Deputy Zhang of the Shelby County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee responded to a call regarding a potential package theft reported by Mr. Branch's girlfriend's mother, Vernita Eccles. The allegations were based on doorbell camera footage that showed a neighbor taking a package off of the porch. The deputies arrived on the scene and began to question the witnesses. Ms. Eccles informed the deputies that the neighbor across the street was the one who took the package, and that she may have a bench warrant for her arrest. After speaking with Ms. Eccles for approximately 2 minutes, the deputies decide to make contact with the neighbor. As they make their way across the street, Deputy James announces that he intends to arrest the neighbor without validating any of the claims made by the callers.
What's her name? Can't put her handcuffs until we figure out what's going on.
Once the deputies made contact with the neighbor, they immediately placed her into handcuffs. While being detained, the neighbor informs the deputies that the package in question belonged to her and had been delivered to the wrong address, and instructs her partner to produce the box with her name on it. After briefly examining the package, Deputy Zhang decides to place the neighbor into the back of his patrol car while they investigate further. Once inside the vehicle, the neighbor explains her side of the story to Deputy Zhang, and essentially proves that the package rightfully belonged to her, not Ms. Eccles. The deputies then return to Ms. Eccles' house to clarify that the package was sent to the wrong address. As the officers were explaining the situation, Mr. Branch arrived on the scene while open carrying a firearm on his hip.
I talked to Comcast.
Whose name should it be under?
Vernita Eccles.
Vernita Eccles? Yeah. Okay, now that box that came off the front porch, did y'all see a name on that box by any chance?
We didn't get a chance to look at it because it was stolen before we got the chance.
Now if we show you guys what the box looked like. How you doing, sir? Are you an officer, sir?
Put your hands up, man.
I don't need to put my hands up.
This is for officer safety.
I don't need to put my hands up.
Hold on, wait. Put your hands up. Put your hands up, dude.
Sir, wait.
Deputy James orders Mr. Branch to disarm himself for quote-unquote officer safety, and when Mr. Branch refuses, the deputy unholsters his firearm. According to Section 39-17-1351 of the Tennessee Code, Tennessee citizens, quote, have a legal right to keep and bear arms for their common defense, but the General Assembly has the power, by law, to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. The statute also states that Tennessee residents can obtain an enhanced handgun carry permit that entitles the permit holder to carry any handgun or handguns that they legally own or possess. However, while the statute requires a permit holder to have their permit in their immediate possession at all times when carrying a handgun and display it on demand of a law enforcement officer, the statute does not require citizens to disarm themselves whenever they are around police officers. Rather, the statute states that, quote, any law enforcement officer of this state or of any county or municipality may, within the realm of the officer's lawful jurisdiction, and when the officer is acting in the lawful discharge of the officer's official duties, disarm a permit holder at any time when the officer reasonably believes it is necessary for the protection of the permit holder, officer, or other individual or individuals. In the 2011 case of Embody versus Ward, the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee interpreted this statute as authorizing the, quote, temporary seizure of weapons that raises a threat to public safety, and held that it authorized officers to temporarily disarm an individual in a public park who was wearing camouflage and carrying an AK-47 type weapon that had been modified with an orange barrel tip to resemble a toy after several park visitors had expressed concerns. The court concluded that under these circumstances, the officer, quote, had a reasonable belief to disarm plaintiff as necessary for the protection of the permit holder, officer, or other individuals in the park area until the weapon was determined to be lawful. This situation is distinguishable from the situation in the Embody case, as Mr. Branch was carrying an ordinary firearm rather than an assault rifle and was on private property. As nothing in Mr. Branch's behavior indicated he intended to do anything with the firearm besides exercise his Second Amendment right to carry it, it would be incredibly challenging for Deputy James to argue that he had a reasonable belief it was necessary to disarm Mr. Branch for officer safety.
The proper procedures, you're supposed to ask if he has his handgun permit.
You don't know the farm. Okay,
yes, I do.
Hey,
yes, I do. We went to the class. Yes, I do.
I don't need to keep my
Put your gun away. Yes, put your gun away.
It's for officer safety.
You asked to see his permit.
Okay, can he just step in the house then?
No,
I need that car.
We're not talking to you, man.
No, sir.
We're not talking to you.
You asked to see.
We're not talking to you
Go in
right
the
now.
house then.
I don't need to go in there. I haven't committed a crime.
Do you have a
I
permit?
haven't committed. I do have a
We're not saying.
Where's your permit?
Amber, record Officer James. We're gonna make a star out of you today. I'm gonna make a star out of James today. I'm gonna make you a star, James. I'm gonna make you a star today.
Step away, man. We're not talking to you.
Okay.
Let me see your permit.
Okay.
Keep this arm up. Let me see your permit.
I don't need to keep anything. I can do whatever the
This is Officer Safety. No, sir.
do whatever.
Calm
Do
down.
what you do. Do your
Police
job.
officers
Do your
are-
job. Hold on, hold on.
Police officers are in your presence for
You're
our
a servant.
safety.
You're a servant. Do your
For
job.
our
Do your
safety.
job, servant. Do your
I'm
job.
not gonna tell you
Servant,
again.
Do your job, sir.
Aaron,
What did I do?
Aaron.
He's a servant. They work for me.
Aaron.
Servant, do
You're
your
about to go to
job.
jail. You're about to
Do
go to
your
jail.
job. I'm
You're
not
gonna
gonna
go
go
to
to jail.
jail for
Back
it.
up. Back up.
You know the
You want to go to jail too?
Do you have my permit?
This is really
Do you have
conduct.
the
Oh,
permit?
How am I
Do you have the
disorderly?
permit?
Look,
Do you
man,
have the permit?
I'm telling you, you're about to go to jail.
You got two options. Disarm
You have
yourself
my
or leave
permit.
the scene.
Why do I have to disarm?
Disarm yourself or leave the
Why do I
scene.
have to disarm
You got two
myself?
options.
Why do I have to?
You got two options.
That's not legal.
You got two
You're
options.
telling me to disarm myself. This is my family.
Our safety, officer safety.
That's not
We're
how-
asking you.
That's not how the law works.
Yes, sir, it is.
That's not.
Okay.
That's not
You
how
go to
the
law school?
works.
You go
I
to
did go to law school.
Okay, did you pass- you passed the bar?
I did
So
pass
you're
the
a
bar.
lawyer.
I am a lawyer.
Okay.
I don't have to
Just
disarm
go in the
myself.
house.
That's not how the
Just
law
go in the
works.
house.
Come here.
I'm not
Come here.
going anywhere with
Come
you.
here.
Just go
I
in
have
the
not
house.
committed a crime. They know I haven't committed a crime.
Okay,
They know I have not
Aaron.
committed a
Let me
crime.
try to
Amber, I want you to record them. I'm gonna make stars out of both of them.
ahead.
James and Zing. I'm gonna make big stars out of them. I love tyrants. I love tyrants like yourself.
Either
Property.
you step inside or you go to
I'm a
jail.
private. I'm a law-abiding citizen.
5, 4,
I'm not your child.
Hold on, wait. Hold on, wait.
Two. All right,
man, come
on. Go
I'm not in
No,
bro,
because
you're
you
not scaring nobody with that public permit ass shit.
over there.
You're not talking about.
Turn that situation over there. I'm doing my job. I was calling here, sir.
Okay. For a stolen package. Is it against the
Look,
law?
are you part of this? Are you part of this whole
That's
thing?
my mother. That I
So
can
are
be
you the
here
victim? Are you the
whenever
victim?
I want to.
Are you the victim?
I can
Okay, I'm not talking to you anymore. I'm not talking to you anymore.
You don't have to.
Okay.
It's not
I don't need
about
to hear your
going-
voice because you're about to go to
it's
jail like your partner.
not- Is it against the law to speak? A freedom of speech, right?
The officers threatened to arrest both Mr. Branch and his girlfriend for disorderly conduct for arguing with them, despite the fact they are on private property where they are invited guests. While the First Amendment does permit some restrictions on the content in a few limited areas, as well as reasonable restrictions to the time, place, and manner of an individual's speech, these restrictions typically apply to public locations rather than a home. In the 1994 case of City of Ladue versus Gileo, the Supreme Court held that, quote, "A special respect for individual liberty in the home has long been part of our culture and our law, and that principle has special resonance when the government seeks to constrain a person's ability to speak there, whereas the government's need to mediate among various competing uses, including expressive ones for public streets and facilities, is constant and unavoidable. Its need to regulate temperate speech from the home is surely much less pressing." Similarly, in the 1969 case of Stanley versus Georgia, the Supreme Court determined that a Georgia law criminalizing the private possession of obscene materials violated the First Amendment, finding that the, quote, "mere categorization of these films as obscene is insufficient justification for such a drastic invasion of personal liberties guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendments. Whatever may be the justifications for other statutes regulating obscenity, we do not think they reach into the privacy of one's own home. If the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business telling a man, sitting alone in his own house, what books he may read or what films he may watch. Our whole constitutional heritage rebels at the thought of giving government the power to control men's minds. Given the high level of respect given to the rights of individuals to engage in free speech on private property, the officer's threats to arrest Mr. Branch and his girlfriend likely violated the First Amendment. Additionally, according to Section 39-17-305 of the Tennessee Code, which is the state's disorderly conduct statute, quote, "A person commits an offense who, in a public place and with intent to cause public annoyance or alarm, engages in fighting or in violent or threatening behavior, refuses to obey an official order to disperse issued to maintain public safety in dangerous proximity to a fire, hazard, or other emergency, or creates a hazardous or physically offensive condition by any act that serves no legitimate purpose. A person also violates this section who makes unreasonable noise that prevents others from carrying on lawful activities." Under this definition, arguing with a police officer on private property could never constitute disorderly conduct, even if the First Amendment would not be implicated.
Ma'am.
You got a baby you just brought me. I'm not being disorderly. I'm not being.
Okay, I'm a bunch of lawyers over here.
The law says I have to present. I didn't even have to give you my ID.
Did you present it at first? No.
Did you
I
do
don't
that
have
before?
to.
Y'all didn't
I don't
ask
have
for
to. I
it.
haven't committed
You
a crime.
walking-
What crime do you
Alright.
suspect me of committing?
I'm
We
walking
asked you,
into
listen to
my
me.
house.
Articulate
Listen
what crime I've
Listen to me.
committed.
Listen to me, okay?
Articulate what crime I've committed.
I never said you committed a
Okay,
crime.
then. Can I have my
You're supposed to present
Can I have my permit?
you're supposed to present it to us.
I'm not supposed
No,
to. I'm
go
not
ahead.
supposed to permit.
Get out of here.
Tired.
Get out of here.
He's tired. I like him.
It is important to bear in mind that while the officers were occupied with their verbal confrontation with Mr. Branch, the unidentified woman who was detained at the beginning of this interaction has been in the back of the patrol car this entire time. While the court would likely find that the officers had reasonable suspicion to initially detain her based on the reported theft, because the officers placed her in handcuffs in the back of a police vehicle for an extended period of time after she offered evidence that could have dispelled their suspicions, a court could conclude that the detention transformed into an unreasonable seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. In the 1997 case of U.S. versus Avery, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals explained that, quote, although an officer may have reasonable suspicion to detain a person or his possessions for investigation, the officer's investigative detention can mature into an arrest or seizure if it occurs over an unreasonable period of time or under unreasonable circumstances. Similarly, in the 1999 case of Houston versus Clark County Sheriff Deputy, the Sixth Circuit stated that, quote, an investigative Terry stop may indeed ripen into an arrest through the passage of time or the use of force. When this occurs, the continued detention of suspects must be based upon probable cause. Although there is no bright line that distinguishes an investigative stop from a de facto arrest, the Supreme Court held in the 1985 case of United States versus Sharp that, quote, in assessing whether a detention is too long in duration to be justified as an investigative stop, we consider it appropriate to examine whether the police diligently pursued a means of investigation that was likely to confirm or dispel their suspicions quickly, during which time it was necessary to detain the defendant. In the Houston case, the Sixth Circuit concluded that placing suspects in handcuffs in a police cruiser did not constitute an arrest, concluding that, quote, detention in a police cruiser does not automatically transform a Terry stop into an arrest, nor does the use of handcuffs exceed the bounds of a Terry stop so long as the circumstances warrant that precaution. However, given the minor, non-violent nature of the offense being investigated, the woman's cooperativeness, and the fact that the woman provided evidence that the package was in her name, her handcuffed detention in the police cruiser does not appear warranted.
You're not used to this, Zane.
You step back inside.
Zane, you're not used to this.
Hey, dude. Mr. Branch.
He's not even talking
Mr. Branch.
to him.
I'm gonna be quiet.
Tell you how
You
this
can't
works.
be the complainant in a First Amendment protected activity.
Are you sure? Do you want to test me today? Do you want to test me today?
Sir, stop.
I'm done.
We need some money.
Stop.
Come on,
I'm done.
Aaron.
The officers explained that the package was sent to the wrong address, and that the contents of the package did not match what Miss Eccles was expecting. After clearing up the issue with the complainants, the officers released the unidentified woman after having detained her for approximately 16 minutes. The woman then allowed the officers to enter her home and take pictures of the contents of the package in question. Deputy James informed Mr. Branch's family that he would file a continuation notice and have an officer follow up at a later date. After one more brief verbal exchange with Mr. Branch, the deputies returned to their patrol vehicles and began circling the street in an effort to locate Mr. Branch's car by running the tags on all the cars parked nearby.
Hey, he came out the black car, right?
Yeah, I'm going to get the tag off there in a second.
Once the deputies found his vehicle, they issued him parking citations, and their body cam footage ends with some interesting remarks.
I mean, do you think I did anything wrong there? Pull my gun?
Is our
I
safety?
didn't pull at him. I said I was pulled out because he was getting outraged.
Hold on.
We should have took his to jail.
It is unclear whether Mr. Branch filed a complaint or took any legal action against the deputies. Overall, Deputy James and Deputy Zhang get an F for attempting to disarm Mr. Branch without a reasonable basis for doing so, threatening to arrest Mr. Branch and his girlfriend for exercising their First Amendment rights, and for detaining the unidentified neighbor for a questionable amount of time prior to conducting a legitimate investigation. At no point during this interaction did Mr. Branch's conduct suggest that he was a threat to the deputies, and the notion that citizens should be required to disarm themselves in the presence of an officer while on private property is contrary to the current interpretation of the Second Amendment. Both of the deputies utterly failed to de-escalate the situation, and Deputy James's decision to unholster his weapon was unnecessary, unwarranted, and extremely reckless. That action alone had the potential to needlessly escalate this encounter into a deadly altercation, but Mr. Branch remained calm and was not intimidated by the deputies' empty threats. Both of the deputies demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the First Amendment and the concept of private property, and made a concerted effort to overstep their boundaries on multiple occasions. Ultimately, the deputies did not make any arrests, but that is likely due to Mr. Branch's challenging dialogue and willingness to stand up for his rights. Mr. Branch gets an A-. Because although he could have invoked his right to remain silent more tactfully, he rightfully challenged the legitimacy of the deputies' orders, refused to be intimidated by their conduct, and managed to remain relatively calm and collected despite efforts of the deputies to escalate the encounter. When the deputies initially confronted Mr. Branch, his response was stern but not vulgar or aggressive. The deputies continued to escalate the encounter, and while Mr. Branch did eventually get angry, he never got physically aggressive with the deputies, and everything he said would likely be considered protected speech. This interaction boiled down to a battle of egos, but the law appears to favor Mr. Branch's assertions. It could be argued that Mr. Branch may have benefited from invoking his right to remain silent, and that is likely the case in almost every police encounter. However, it is equally arguable that Mr. Branch's unrelenting demand that his rights be respected likely played a major role in preventing him from being arrested. Either way, I commend Mr. Branch for having the courage and conviction to stand up for his rights, and I encourage you all to give your support to the News Now Memphis channel. You can find a link in the description below. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for more police interaction content.